Right now, it's time for a chat with Pat.
Yes, and today and tomorrow it'll be a two-parter. It's an article I wrote years ago. Lent and life will never be the same. I'll give you the abridged edition. So it starts. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. This is a phrase that accompanies the signing with ashes that ushers in the Lenten season. I had heard this phrase my entire life. It brought into focus what was really important. All this around me that concerns me, that causes me anxiety, will pass away. This is a season that reminds us to focus on what is really important in our lives, to make sure that all pleasures are not in control of my life, but are put in perspective of something larger, my relationship with God and others. This is a season that has always called me back, much like Hosea. Come, let us return to the Lord. Lent reminded me to return to what's most important, the Lord. But Lent also reminded me that returning to the Lord meant taking up my cross daily. Lent of 2005 really brought home what the Lord meant in taking up the cross. But it also reinforced the idea that Lent always leads to the Easter Triduum, the living out of the Paschal mystery. It was a still night. My husband Jim and I were sleeping soundly when the phone rang. He jumped out of bed and headed to the kitchen to answer it, and I drowsily looked at the alarm clock to see the time. It was 2:37 a.m. I put on my robe and headed to the kitchen to hear part of my husband's conversation. It appeared he was speaking to his mom, and something had happened to his dad. As he hung up, he shared the brief details that his dad had gone into convulsions and the emergency squad had taken him to the hospital while his mother was still at their apartment. We decided to go to the apartment so that I could stay with his mom, who also had been struggling with health issues, and Jim would continue on to the hospital to be with his dad. As our car finally pulled into their driveway, his mother appeared at the door. She gave us the few facts that she had. My husband kissed me goodbye and left for the hospital as I settled in with his mom. She was worried, trying to figure out the same things that were going through my head. I suggested that she try to get some rest and that Jim would call as soon as they knew something. She wanted to stay in her chair, so I dozed on the couch, but neither of us were fully giving ourselves over to our tiredness. Around 4 a.m., the phone again pierced the silence. It was my husband with the news. His father had been diagnosed with cancer, and the prognosis wasn't good. It had already progressed from his lungs to his brain. The hospital needed the advance directives, so Jim asked me to bring them as soon as possible. I relayed that message to his mom, and she explained where the directives were kept. Nestled away from everyday view, they were in an envelope, in a lockbox, in a cedar chest, in a closet, in the spare bedroom. As I entered the dark room, I realized this is where we put these types of documents, hoping they'll never see the light of day. In this case, we no longer had a choice. These documents could no longer stay hidden. They had to be brought out of the darkness and into the light so that they could take effect. It was about a 20-minute drive to the hospital, and I called my husband on his cell phone as we were entering the parking lot so he could meet us and take us to his dad's room. His father knew the diagnosis, but none of us were ready to own it quite yet. It was now around 7 a.m., and Jim and I decided to give his mom and dad some time together while we had to reach his brother who lived out of state. Cell phones couldn't be used in the hospital, so we walked into the brisk February air. The cold air brought back to us the reality of our own lives. Both of us realized we had to call our places of employment and explain what was happening and make arrangements for our work to be covered. My husband called his brother first and told him that we would keep him informed about what was happening, and then he called his work. As I dialed my place of employment, the Diocese of Toledo, I realized it was Ash Wednesday. I was supposed to organize the Mass that day for the employees and do the music, but the appropriate people assured me all would be covered and prayers would be offered for our family. As we headed back into the hospital, I realized this was going to be a real Lenten journey. Our family would be traveling the road to Calvary along with the Lord. Lent was taking on a whole new meaning for me. It was odd because I recalled my mother's death 2 days before Ash Wednesday, 19 years prior. I remember my own family sitting around the kitchen table on Ash Wednesday as my brother, who was a Catholic priest, who is a Catholic priest, celebrated Mass for us, and he signed each of us with ashes. My mother had died suddenly, and we were in shock. I can't even remember anything about that Lenten season. Looking back, I was one of the living dead during that season, numb and unaware. This journey with my husband's family was going to be different. It was not going to be a sudden death. It was truly going to be a journey to the cross. After getting his dad settled in and talking with doctors, his mother was tired and wanted to go home for a while, so my husband obliged and I stayed with his dad. I loved his parents. They were wonderful people. They had taken me into their family like I was the daughter they never had, and I was blessed. I talked with my father-in-law late that afternoon. He was beginning to realize that the prognosis was not good, and he told me he was ready to die. Life had been very good to him, and he was quite appreciative. His great concern was he did not want to be a burden for Jim and I. I smiled as he said this and gently teased him that I'm sure my husband had been a burden for he and his wife for more than 18 years. He replied that that wasn't true. My husband was never a burden to them. I smiled and said, of course not. You love him. Love, I told him, means an individual is never a burden to you. We loved him so much. I'm sorry, this gets me. That caring for him would never be a burden. I remember that he had this look of recognition, understanding that everything that he had done in his life for his wife and sons could never be considered a burden because it was done out of love. Now we had the opportunity to give back, to share our love with him. More days passed in the hospital involving tests, conversation with doctors, and visits with specialists, and a final decision was made to transport him for radiation therapy. He would be there for 2 or 3 weeks. One of us would be at the care facility morning, afternoon, and evening. My mother-in-law would visit when she felt up to it. These times provided wonderful conversations with my father-in-law. I just want to stop here because I think his graciousness with the healthcare workers were amazing. He treated them with respect and gratitude. The hospital would allow me to wheel him to radiation treatments. He was just an amazing man. And this was a different kind of Lent. Instead of daily Mass and weekly Way of the Cross, it was daily visits to the care center and accompanying my father-in-law on his way to his final destination. The time came that the treatments ended, and we could take him and his wife to his new assisted living apartment. This was actually just another stop on the way to the cross.